Hey guys, Chris from Laser Time here, standing in front of my amazing colossal Disney shelf because something truly amazing has just happened.
It's stopped.
After 2 whole decades of unavailability, The Lion King, The Jungle Book, and Aladdin have been released on good old games seemingly out of nowhere. Now, if you don't know why aging dorks like me are currently losing their shit, it's because after all this time, we've just sort of gotten used to our favorite licensed games from the era dominated by Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis being gone forever. For decades, these games have only been available on illegal ROM sites that you have to navigate a maze of malware just to get. Right now, we're living in a time of Steam accounts and endless remastered versions of games from the previous generation, so most players nowadays expect their favorite games to be purchasable and, more importantly, playable as long as their accounts remain in good standing. But this was not always the way. Backwards compatibility is only now falling out of fashion, but it wasn't even a thing back when these Disney games premiered on 16-bit consoles. Re-releasing classic games from the Super Nintendo/Genesis era wasn't even a thing in the 90s, and that's back when they were still popular enough to make the most money. Re-releasing things like this became particularly difficult once games shifted from sprites to polygons with the release of the PlayStation, so you can understand why publishers didn't want to bother reconfiguring games from the previous generation to sell them against the new and fancy technology of these 3D triangles that was all the rage in the mid-90s. You have to remember that games like The Lion King, Aladdin, and Jungle Book were basically related merchandise to hyper-successful brands. Ephemeral products made by companies outside of Disney with mountains of contracts and legal paperwork in tow. You wouldn't expect Hasbro to continue manufacturing that Timon doll you love just because it was popular, nor would you expect McDonald's to start throwing Baloo characters back into Happy Meals 20 years later just because nostalgic nerds like me would pay 60 times the original price. This is not to bore you with legalese because I don't have any of that information, but it's more to say that, like, we do live in a time where video games are regarded as more than just merchandise. Yes, video games are art, but it's equally amazing because re-releases like this show that the gatekeepers to this IP understand that Aladdin on the Genesis is not the same as Aladdin on a beach towel from JCPenney's, but they also take longer to make, require more thought, and they cost the consumer more, and more importantly, just by being a game, offer an experience that requires a different level of engagement. And if you do it right, you can create a shared experience between millions of people. Something people like me will want to experience again and again, talk about with friends, and even forge bonds with complete strangers. It's the beauty of video games. I don't need to convince you of that. And this is what makes these games in particular interesting. Both myself and this YouTube channel have reveled in the glory and schadenfreude of games starring our favorite movie and TV characters. However, it can't be ignored that most licensed games are, and always have been, hot, drippy garbage. But that's what makes this trio of games so exceptional, because they're exceptional. I mean, it's only through the gift of hindsight that we can even value gems like Capcom's DuckTales or Konami's Tiny Toon Adventures. And that's only because we have enough distance we can ignore steaming turds like Roger Rabbit, Back to the Future, Top Gun, and a bunch of other licensed games that betrayed our trust in the brands themselves. I don't need to tell you this. Games based on movies and TV shows are historically pretty shitty. Poor representations of their characters visually, incongruous quality, and meant more to skate by on the power of its brand and box art. But that all changed in 1993 with Aladdin on the Genesis.
That's not the right game.
We put both the Genesis and Super Nintendo's Aladdin to the test a while back, and even though the SNES version is actually pretty good, it was the Genesis one that got all of the attention. Because, look at it, unlike all those other crude games I just showed you, Aladdin looked and moved like its big screen counterparts. Today, with a countless amount of processing power and free-to-play mobile games, it's easy to forget that before 1993, home console game characters never looked like their cartoons we were watching. And they certainly didn't move with the fluidity of Aladdin. To put it simply, Aladdin changed everything. Only Sonic the Hedgehog has sold more Genesis/Mega Drive games than Aladdin. Aladdin sold more than 4 million copies on a single platform. To put that in perspective, that's more than Uncharted 4 has sold on PS4, it's more than Halo 5 has sold on Xbox One, it's almost as much as Smash Bros. Has sold on Wii U. And this is largely thanks to the efforts of the now non-existent Virgin Interactive and Command & Conquer creator Westwood Studios, who worked with the actual Disney animators to achieve these unprecedented visuals, characters, environments, and situations that better resemble their cinematic counterparts. Following Aladdin's success, instead of farming out The Lion King to any single platform developer who could pay a licensing fee, Disney contracted Virgin and Westwood to create every version of Lion King. You get to play as both young and old versions of Simba as you play through several levels inspired by the events of the film, including one of my favorite stages ever, one of the only levels that I can think of that's entirely shelled by a Disney musical number, the I Just Can't Wait to Be King stage. And if you're within 10 years of my age, you probably played it, because The Lion King sold 3 million copies across the Super Nintendo, Genesis, Game Gear, and Boy, and this continued success led to something that's even more near and dear to this Disney lover's heart. This being the Play It Loud 90s.
You ever try to get to level 10 in your underwear, boy?
Disney's The Jungle Book.
for Genesis, Game Gear, Game Boy, NES, and Super NES systems.
The players weren't demanding games featuring
strong female characters.
So it looks as if Virgin and Westwood balked at the idea of developing something based on Disney's next film, Pocahontas. Now let's not dwell on that, because I'm pretty happy with what happened instead next. Instead of making a game based on a new movie, the biggest name in Disney games opted to look back and make something based on a bona fide classic. And this is where you get The Jungle Book, the first game ever starring Baloo, that didn't feature him flying a plane with the Disney Afternoon Tailspin crew. Now, as a Disney fan, I couldn't have been more excited by this idea. A capable developer making side-scrollers based on decades worth of classic Disney theatrical animation. This is something I wish I could kickstart forever. But I'm biased, so regardless what I think, there's still that little principle of diminishing returns. Even though it reviewed fairly well, The Jungle Book came out the same year as The Lion King. Can you really expect people to buy what's essentially the exact same game, shelled in a different film, within a matter of months? How many solidly made 2D platformers can the market bear when new consoles promoting arcade-perfect visuals and 3D capabilities are less than a year away? So even though it may break my heart, a string of beautiful Disney-based side-scrollers was not to be, and that sucks. Because it looks like that's very much what was going to happen. Because judging by the next game, it looks like they were going to go all the way back to the beginning. Just 1 year later, and 55 years after its theatrical premiere, Pinocchio comes home to consoles. Pinocchio might very well be my favorite Disney movie. The game is gorgeous, but most people don't even know it exists. I can't imagine it sold well, and worst of all, this was Disney's final collaboration with Virgin. Following this, the PlayStation debuted, every licensed game became rushed and forgettable 3D garbage, Disney stopped publishing big-budget games based on its movies after Wreck-It Ralph in 2012, and the only place these animated characters had a place to play on consoles, Disney Infinity, ceased development in 2016. I'm sorry, Disney fans. It's all over. Until now! Seemingly out of nowhere, Disney just surprised everyone by releasing Aladdin, Lion King, and Jungle Book on GOG with no warning. But again, I'm doing this because this release is unprecedented. And given how tricky we now know licensed games are, it gets even trickier when you want to port anything released on consoles. Sega and Nintendo still have a say in where their ancient hardware can be emulated. So how did this even happen? Well, for the less PC inclined, these are revamped versions of DOS games ported from consoles. This allows Disney to avoid a lot of redevelopment costs since the games are already optimized for Windows and such. However, skirting traditional game classifications, QA, and even stupid shit you don't think about like the ESRB and PEGI means it's highly unlikely that you'll ever be playing these games on your Xbones or PS4. Look, I'm just happy they're available, but I can't imagine we won't hear complaints from console gamers because consoles are inarguably where most people played these for the first time. And these games specifically run via DOSBox emulation. And we know these are the DOS versions because you can see their certifications. But the silver lining here is that these are all pretty well optimized ports to begin with. If you played Aladdin or Lion King on a Master System, Amiga, or an NES, you're getting either an enhanced or comprehensive version in the good old games package. Ooh, and look at that, they even come with fancy new sprite posters. There's only one notable exception here, and that's the Jungle Book. The Jungle Book on good old games is based on the Genesis version, not the vaguely superior Super Nintendo version. But whatever, it's a solidly crafted game based on a movie that I love to death. And if you're still watching this for whatever reason, I know this might be something that only I care about, but this is very important to me because I just kind of written off the idea that some of these games would ever come back in playable form. There's not a lot of companies like Disney, so I can't imagine the rest of the world will follow suit, but it does mean that anything's possible. Anything can come back. Whatever, these are all great, they're available at a good price, and you buy them once, and now they're yours forever, officially and legally. Alright everyone, thank you for indulging me. If you like this kind of stuff, why not subscribe to the channel? Maybe listen to Laser Time Podcast at lasertimepodcast.com. But if you want to see more about old movie and TV games, we talked about The Lion King a bit in our top 1994 games according to the US box office, and I also am the only person in the world to care about Tiny Toon games enough to rank them in numerical order. Thank you guys so much for watching.